Hello and welcome to Journey Lines, the podcast answering the question, how did they get there? I'm your host, Kim Minnick. Each episode, I invite a guest to complete a reflective exercise, plotting the highs and lows of their career against a line of neutrality. Together, we talk through the ups, downs, and everything in between. My guest today, Allison McMillan. Allison, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm so good. I'm glad we got our technical issues worked out. We were having problems hearing each other, and it was user error on my end, I think.
Computers computering, as usual.
I am so excited to talk through your journey line. It's got some gorgeous AI'd, ChatGPT'd avatars on it. We were just talking before we hit record about how that's becoming a verb now.
Yeah. Well, and I was trying to figure out how to visualize. I didn't want just sort of a bunch of logos or things, and I was like, do I go through old pictures? And I was like, well, how can I represent these different areas and phases of my life but make them look cohesive? And so I know what I'll do. I'll upload an image of myself to AI and then give it different prompts so that it puts me in sort of different scenarios and different situations throughout my life. So
I love that. How long did it take you to tweak things?
not so long, actually. And I'm very bad. I'm good at AI prompts. I'm very, very bad at image prompts. It's creating the right images is still the thing that I'm really working on. But this one actually wasn't so bad. And it was, for my early years, it was okay, make me look a little younger. And for my nowadays, it was make me look a little older, but shockingly, it didn't take as long as I anticipated it would.
Well, nailed it. It's gorgeous. Before we dive into it, tell us what's going on today, a little bit about yourself, personally, professionally, holistically.
Yeah. So I live just outside of Washington, D.C. I have two kids that are in first and fourth grade, older boy, younger girl, who I will be talking about because they're a large part of my journey, and how they've impacted my journey. And I run my own business. So, Tevlin Consulting is my consultancy, where I offer advising and mentoring, fractional VP of engineering services, and also facilitating things. So strategic planning, retreats, offsites, all of those different kinds of experiences. I basically say my tagline is I help people communicate better, and I do that in a variety of different ways and services. So that's a little bit about me today.
I love it. It speaks near and dear to my heart. I love a good offsite. I love good corporate communication. I think that's really how we connected in the first place, just a mutual love of those things.
Yes, and doing them all the right way, right?
Most importantly, we're not trying to, half-ass anything.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into your journey line. I'm so excited. So I see we are starting below the line, which is a little rare. Questioning math and science, which, Allison, I have to tell you, I have questioned math and science my whole life. So where are we? What's going on? What's happening in life?
Yeah. This is it's a very interesting part, I think, of my upbringing. I was raised in a relatively traditional household where really the expectation for me growing up was that my goal was to get married and have children, right? There were no sort of career was a thing that you could do for a little while, but it wasn't strongly encouraged or strongly, right? It was really sort of the goal was to have someone that would take care of you and to be raising children and that sort of piece. And so a fairly traditional upbringing, traditional background. And part of that was that, just girls don't do math and science, right? That very typical sort of stereotype.
Do home ec. You don't need to do shop or that. Go do home ec. Go learn how to darn socks. And
Right. I mean, and not even it wasn't even home ec, but it was just sort of humanities, liberal arts, right? Those sorts of those sorts of careers as opposed to like the very technical ones, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I have an older brother and a younger sister. And so my older brother was like, okay, he's the one that does math. He's the one that sort of does the hard. Like we got a computer when I was a kid. But the computer was like really mostly for him, like a little bit for us. But it was really, this, I think when you grow up that way, right? And when you're sort of encouraged in specific directions, um, for me, there was a deep belief that I couldn't do math and science, right? As opposed to trying it and being interested in it. And I don't even know if I would have been interested in like math and science as a kid, but as somebody who works in engineering leadership, right, there are so many people that are like, oh, I started programming when I was 7, my Commodore 64, I was building computers when I was in middle school, right? That is not my background. My background is one where I was, sort of ingrained in like, oh, that's really hard stuff. So like maybe do some of these other things over here. And so yeah, that's like the math and science question mark, because there's a lot of it creates this story that you believe and this story that you tell yourself, whether it's true or not. And I think sometimes those stories that we tell ourselves are the most difficult to move past or to overcome.
It resonates so deeply. I grew up in the southeastern United States. There was a lot of tradition, kind of in my upbringing. Similarly, I always thought like, oh, I'm just bad. Math and science. That's hard. That's hard, and I'm not good at it. You have to learn it and practice it. But then when I grew up and started doing like in-depth compensation or people analytics, I was like, oh, this is math. I like this.
It's also math. Yeah.
What a sneaky little lie we have told ourselves. And I am married to an engineer, and I realized like, oh, maybe I'm not bad at math. Like maybe that was just a lie I told myself for so long.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and the piece, like the sort of like move to the next, that like college realization, right, was I was a political science major, so it wasn't even about like a math and science realization. It was more about like a I can do hard things realization, right? And like because I was in these university classes and they were large classes and, professor would ask a question. It was like my first or second year that like I would raise my hand and answer the question. And the answer that I had was correct. And it was like, oh, wait, I think this is hard. And I think I'm doing these hard things. And so it wasn't even about like math and science, but it was about complex situations or figuring out, there's a lot of like game theory and aspects of that when you're learning about political science. And so, it was sort of like that realization was more like, yeah, it was just like, oh, I can do hard things. And I have answers to questions that a lot of my peers don't have answers to.
What was it like coming to that realization and exploring it in college?
It was, it was exciting and interesting, right? It was sort of like, oh, cool. Like, I feel like it opened up a lot of doors for me that I wouldn't have opened on my own. So like a good example, I was then a part of like a honors course, which was maybe a dozen of us that proposed sort of like undergraduate honors thesis work. And we're sort of on this like different level. And through that, I actually did international research for my thesis, and like got grant money to do it because it was like, because there was some support at home, but it was also a little bit like, what are you doing? I guess if you can figure it out, like you can do this. And so I was like, okay, I'll figure it out. And so like I went through like institutional review board process because I was interviewing people. and I did like international field work, and I presented my thesis at a conference, and like all of this was like as an undergraduate, right? And that is like nowhere near a goal that I would have reached for or thought I could do, or even like I wouldn't have opened that door for myself if I didn't have this realization that was like, oh, I can actually do anything that I want to do. I just have to figure out how to get there and what it is to do it.
That's a huge thesis for an undergrad, it feels like. Do you mind sharing what was it on?
Yeah, it was it was on immigration policy in Israel, and basically like Israel does a lot of benefits and things for immigrants, but some of those benefits depend on what country you're coming from and the background. And so I interviewed like a lot of different immigrants. I had to like find translators. Like I interviewed, it's sort of like nutty actually when I look at like how old I was when I did all of these things. But yeah, I interviewed a lot of like immigrants coming from these different countries and different backgrounds, and government officials and research, and sort of like pulled it all together into this sort of like immigration policy thesis and what that looked like. So totally not relevant to literally anything that I do today or that I've done for the last 10 years. But I mean, but it was sort of, and again, it was like just being resourceful, right? And figuring out like, oh, okay, I'm smart. I can do hard things. In order to do those hard things, I can be resourceful and figure out how to get there, and who to talk to, what to apply for, like what resources are available for me. And yeah, I mean, there was, okay, so I'll tell this like wild story.
Please.
One of the, I was interviewing one of the immigrant groups that I interviewed were Ethiopians. There's a large Ethiopian population in Israel. And this was like decades ago. And when most immigrants move to Israel, when a lot of immigrants move to Israel, they live in like an absorption center. And certain absorption centers, like, it's like, okay, you move sort of with your community so that the landing pad is a little bit easier. I hadn't found anyone. It was not deeply ingrained into the Ethiopian community. I didn't speak Amharic or, language.
No?
And so
Didn't pick that up
like,
for this project?
No, not one of the languages I had learned. And so I decided, I was like, okay, but I need to interview this community, these people. And so I went to an absorption center, and basically, so absorption center, it's like usually a handful of different buildings, apartment buildings, and there's sort of a courtyard area. And I hung out in the courtyard and just like struck up conversations with people until I found someone that had enough like Hebrew, English, Amharic who could like act as and who wouldn't mind like acting as my translator for like a couple of hours. And I had like my recorder, and I had to have everybody sign, because I was interviewing people, like had to have everyone sign paperwork. But that was how and this person I met was like amazing and was like introduced me to people. And that was how I got my, I don't know, like 24 interviews from Ethiopian immigrants in Israel.
That's incredible.
Yeah. As like I don't know, I was 20 years old, right? Like as like a 20-year-old.
just sitting in the middle of a courtyard in a foreign country, hoping to talk to somebody in a language you don't speak. I'm obsessed.
Yeah.
All for a homework assignment.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But again, like it's such like a, right, again, like this like realization and et cetera. And it's a high point because it was like, sometimes I reflect on like me decades ago, and it's like, it's like, oh yeah, I did like, that was like a big deal. Like as somebody my age, that would be a big deal thing to do, right? Let alone like as a 20-year-old who just was like, yeah, and I figured, I was like, well, worst case scenario, like nobody wants to talk to me, and then I have to like figure out alternate paths to like get to this goal, right? But yeah.
Amazing. Well, great realization to have in college. Incredible stories. So you keep, obviously, like, you're still in college and you do leadership development for college students. Sounds good.
Yes. So that was after. So I graduated. Yes. So
Post-thesis.
graduated post
How was your
thesis.
thesis received?
I mean, it was received very well, and like I said, I presented it at like a professionals like a academic conference afterwards. Which this is actually funny. I didn't realize that people like don't present undergraduate theses at like professional academic conferences.
No, Allison, that doesn't happen. You're an undergrad.
Like, I saw a conference and I was like, this looks interesting. And they're looking for like policy, like research. Like I did some research that I'll like apply to this, like I'll apply to this conference. And it really like wasn't until after that it was like, oh no, these are all like doctoral students. And I remember like I presented it. I like got this is, back in the day. So there was like an overhead projector. So I had to get like make slides and had to get transparencies.
The transparencies. Hand flip. Yeah.
Made of each slide. And, people started like asking questions and, pulling apart different parts. And, I was like, oh, well, as an undergrad, like I didn't, like these were resources that I had. These were resources that I didn't have. And like the room sort of paused and they were like, wait, this is your undergrad research? And I was like, oh, yeah. And so, but it really wasn't until later that I was like, oh, these like doctoral students, like postdocs, professors, like that is, those are most of the people who present at these conferences.
You just humbled like a whole room. You're like, oh, this girl can do hard things.
Yeah. But for me, it was like, oh, this is like a chance. Because again, it's like, okay, I spent all this time writing this thesis. I wanted to do something with it, right? So I was like, I guess I'll present it. But yes, it was well received, and again, like a great learning experience for me.
Amazing. Okay, so we move on. Leadership development for college students.
Yes. So graduated. Was trying to figure out sort of what to do next, what my next step was. And one of the things that I ended up doing was leadership development for college students on campus. So it was really sort of like helping student group leaders, helping them figure out doing like student group leader training. I forget what it's called, but in college, there are all the like clubs and activities that you can do, and each of them have, a president. And it was basically working with the leadership of those clubs to sort of be like, cool, like to do some training with them, to do some sort of leadership development, how they lead their groups, et cetera. And then part of it was also just like, I used to joke that like the coffee shop was like my second office, because I would just like meet with students for coffee all day and just talk to them about like, what they were studying, where they wanted their lives to go, just sort of like help in that capacity. So, so it was really, really, really interesting, really fun work.
I love that. And were you doing it? Were you employed by the university? Was it like independent? I'm sorry if I missed that.
No, so it was through Hillel, which is a like international group that serves like specifically Jewish students. But on the campus that I was at, it was not just about Jewish students. It was really sort of broadly about any student leadership. So like some of the students that I worked with were Jewish. A large portion of them were Jewish, but there were also, just different people sort of involved. Our whole thing at that Hillel was really specifically about getting out of the building and really being on campus and being like where students are at and supporting them in what they need. And that meant like, sometimes that meant them, and sometimes they were like, oh, I have this friend who's like trying to figure out what their major should be. Like, can you chat with them? And it's like, yep.
Just a little bit of life guidance. I feel like I didn't have anything like that in college. Like I could have gone to the student center, I'm sure, or I'm sure they had counselors, but I just don't feel like it was like so easy to find that connection.
Yeah.
So shout out to you for like reaching out and getting them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that was what was nice was that like we tried to we partnered with a lot of university, like we partnered with the Alumni Association, different university departments, et cetera. But, you know, we also just like were where students were at, right? And so we
Hanging out in
would
coffee
like,
shops.
yeah, like coffee shops or like a fraternity or sorority thing, you know, sort of all of those different like places to like build trust in a different way than like going to a student services building might. Right. It was sort of like probably more like older sibling vibe as opposed to like professional who does this and who has done this for like 20 years sort of vibe.
Yeah. And I like how you mentioned, you know, building trust and kind of helping guide. It feels like that sets you up really well for some of your stuff later in life, but I'm not here to skip ahead on the story. Cool. And how long did you do that for?
I did that for so on campus I did it for 3 years, and then it led to the next step, which is where I was actually working with campus professionals who worked with students.
Cool.
So the next step in my journey is sort of like the up level of, right? So I was on campus, I was working with my peer campus professionals, I was working with students on campus, and then was asked to essentially like play a similar role, but working with internationally with the campus professionals who are working with the students.
Cool. And all of this is in a nonprofit too. Like this organization is nonprofit. Wild. How did did that like constrain some of your activities? Was that an interesting world to start in as you reflect?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't think that it constrained the activities, but it made me really, I guess, like smart and aware. It's that resourcefulness piece, right? Like it wasn't like,
How much can I do with this much?
yeah, like this is where like I think it's actually been really beneficial. There are lots and lots and lots of lessons that I learned from like leadership development with college students and just being where people are at and meeting them where they're at. Also helping to introduce them to other people. Like that was when I was doing leadership development for college students, like I was a huge connector, right? Like, oh, you're thinking about switching your major. This person is in that major. You should chat with them to see what it's like. Or like, because I knew both campus professionals and all these different departments as well as students, like, oh, you're looking for a professor to ask a few questions to about X, Y, and Z. I know this professor. I know this academic advisor, blah, blah, blah. Let me connect you guys so that you can have that conversation. And so,
and if you didn't know somebody, would you just go wait in a courtyard until someone showed up?
I mean, if I didn't know someone, like it was only a matter of time until I like happened to bump into a person that, you know, which is still, I mean, today running my own business, right? Like half of what I do, like I talk to a lot of people, but also there's a lot of things that I don't do. And so I also like when I chat with people, I'm also sort of like, okay, cool. I don't do that, but I know this person who does, and they're amazing, and you should meet them anyway. So like, let me do an email introduction, right? So basically, I've just been like introducing people for like decades.
Just a connector of connections, obsessed with it. So this is back in 2010, and you started doing remote work then. So you didn't have like a home office.
No, well, so we had so this like doing work with campus professionals. We were all based. This is actually the job that brought me to DC. So also previously I was not in DC. This is the job that brought me to DC. And previously the whole office had been based in DC. And I was like, do you know what's silly? Working with campuses all over the country, but having us all based in DC.
Like it is too pricey here and too far from the other side of the country.
Right. Well, because we also like we would have like a West Coast campus liaison and it's like why are they flying every month to the West Coast? Like, what if they just lived on the West Coast?
And then they could go to different places each week instead of
Yes. Yeah, they could hang out in courtyards and coffee shops and meet people.
This is actually what the world needs. Just more people go hang out in courtyards and coffee shops.
But we know through our work of like offsites and retreats and gather, right, that in-person time is like I think remote work is very important, and you still need those connection points. You still need those like trust accelerators. You still need those parts and pieces. So I brought our office from being fully in person in DC to hybrid, which again, this was 2010.
We weren't using that word hybrid.
No, there were also like, let me tell you how few tools there were available for remote work. Literally pre-Slack, pre-Google Drive, pre-like Zoom, pre a lot of things.
You had SharePoint, maybe Link, not Skype for business, but Link.
Yes, Link was how we chatted with each other. We used Skype for team meetings. And I had to find and set up a shared drive for us to be able to use, which was like a
SharePoint drive.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah. And I also I was like running a nonprofit, and I was like, I'm going to buy my staff laptops and docking stations. And right, I'm not working in tech, right? Like this is not like cutting edge. People were like, why are you getting laptops? And I was like, so that people can work from where. And I actually there were specific days that were I tried to role model it as well. So like one day a week, I would try to not be in the office, and I would work from a Smithsonian museum courtyard or lobby, or at that point I wasn't working from home, but I wanted to be okay, well, you can work from anywhere. So I'm working from the Museum of Natural History today, or I'm working from the Renwick Gallery today, or whatever it was. But yeah, it was people definitely questioned that choice to buy everyone laptops. But I was like, look, it's important, and if they're traveling and if we're working with campus professionals, in the office is not where we should be. We should be on campuses, figuring out what it's very different to be on the ground and sort of in the trenches versus sitting in your office chair and I think especially for campus professionals doing student work, it's teacher, right? You are on a lot because you're having coffees or conversations or meeting with university departments during the day, but then all the student activities are happening in the evening or on the weekends. And so that's also when you're on duty and when you're working and when you're doing things. And so, to ask a campus professional to be oh, I in my office wrote this program that you should implement with your students. They're
you don't know.
Who the fuck are you?
You don't know. You don't know. Did you see or did you track any impact from that decision from going hybrid? Did you see fruits of that choice?
I mean, I think the biggest things were one, having access to different talent, right? Which is something that we still see today. Being able to not, if I wanted a person who was very, very familiar with the West Coast campuses, and the thing also with working with college campuses is that there are a lot of different vibes, right? You have commuter colleges, you have state schools, you have Ivies, you have how a UC Berkeley operates is very different than a UC Santa Cruz or, a Hunter or Brooklyn College versus a Harvard or a Yale, right? And it's just you have different student populations who care about different things and have different constraints put on them and their lives, right? And community colleges were also a part of that, which is a whole different, right? When you're at a community college for an associate's versus a four-year university, a commuter school versus a mostly live-in school. And so, having people that were based in these areas and really had a much deeper, better sense of the student community that was being served and the staffing professionals who were serving those communities. Are these campus professionals responsible for one school, or are they responsible for 5 schools? There are big differences there. And so having people remotely in those areas just meant that they could plug in very different ways and in very important ways to be able to do their work more effectively.
And how is it managing a remote team for the first time?
It was pretty good. I mean, I learned, I think, pretty early just what the I don't what the expectations were, right? It's funny because even back in the day, it's how much do I care about somebody's green dot versus their not green dot, right? And that was before the blog posts and all the conversations and but we really early and quickly established it's helpful to over communicate. It's helpful to know are you visiting a bunch of campuses and therefore you're not going to be online all day. We didn't have anyone international, so we weren't dealing with a lot of time zones, but just some understanding around time zones. But I don't know, to be honest, ultimately, it wasn't that challenging for me. I sort of manage. I'm always expectations are clear. You set them, early and often, respect, transparency, clear communication, early feedback when, when needed. And so I don't know. I'm trying to remember, because it was a long time ago now.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it felt that much different from from managing the folks that were in the office.
Cool. Amazing. Well, eventually you decide to move on. And I do see we get in a little, we're sliding a little bit on our chutes and ladders journey here. But this is so cool. You founded a startup and taught yourself how to code. That is such an interesting spot from math and science feels hard and maybe it's not for me. And now you can do hard things and you teach yourself how to code. What's your startup?
So my startup was called Neighborsations. The idea behind it, which I still stand by, even though I had to shut it down, I think it was early for its time, was basically this idea that especially in cities, but we don't really talk to our neighbors. We don't really it's hard to create those communities for ourselves as we get older and as we move out of college campuses and these sort of pre-made, easy to join communities for ourselves. But the idea was your best friend could be living 3 doors down in the same apartment building. And this is a way to connect in a hyper-local way, bounded by your neighborhood, where people entered sort of top 3 things they were interested in and then got connected with other people, again, specifically within their neighborhood based on those interests. And then they were recommended a local business. So ideally a mom and pop as opposed to a chain to visit in order to meet up and actually sort of meet and get to know each other, et cetera. But at a business that connected with the interest that they were connecting about or on.
I very much stand by this idea too. I am so bought in. It's the one concern I have is Nextdoor exists, and now I don't want to meet my neighbors.
So I'll say this: Nextdoor started literally at the same time, and that was my big person who founded Nextdoor. Had some startup more street cred than I did, right? More credibility than I did, and everybody was well, this is the same as Nextdoor, so that's they're going to be bigger and they're going to have more funding. And I will say that seeing Nextdoor evolve, I've been no, it was so different. It would have been so different. But yeah, and again, it came from this idea of I love connecting people. I love people being connected, and it actually came from the inspiration of we had a downstairs neighbor, and I saw him. I went to University of Michigan. I saw him wearing a Michigan shirt one day, and I was "Oh, did you go to Michigan?" And he's I forget if he went or not, but he liked watching the football game. So we started watching Michigan football together. And we're still in touch today. Like we became really good friends. And, you know, I was like, oh, yes, like you can actually like be connected with these people that are like, you don't have to travel 3 neighborhoods over. You don't have to like try to, like, there are actually people in your neighborhood that are probably cool that you would probably get along with, but you have no way. And at that time, it was like the only way to meet people online to offline was through dating apps. Like that was the only thing available. And I still think that's largely the thing that is available.
I was going to say that still feels like the lion's share of the market.
Yeah.
And I think even like Bumble, some of the dating apps tried like Bumble BFF and Be Friends, but it never seemed to quite catch on.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so that was a startup.
Well, I noticed Nextdoor did get a lot of funding, and they are very big, and I haven't seen neighborsations around. You know, what was that choice like? Like, okay, you know, I'm deciding to shut down actually, before we get there, how was it founding a company?
Yes. It was great. I mean, again, like I think of each of these things as like, wow, I learned a lot, right? And that's always my goal, is like to learn a lot and to take all of that knowledge into the next thing that I'm doing. So actually teaching myself to code, there was a Rails Girls workshop, and I literally was like, I was like, I'm going to hate this. I'm not going to understand anything, but I'm building a tech company and I'm trying to find a technical co-founder, and like, it's really hard. And so I should probably just understand some of the basics. And it was this like day-long crash course into Ruby on Rails. And at the end of the day, I was like, this is so cool. I love this. I can use the command line. I can use the terminal. I had something running locally. I like solved an issue. And so it was like immediately, and again, it was like, oh, I can do hard things, right? This like thing that I went in dreading and assuming that I would hate, I realized was like all just like problem solving and figuring out how to like solve one problem to get to the next thing, to get the thing that you wanted to show up on the screen to actually show up on the screen. And I was super lucky. Like the DC community is like just so kind and amazing and welcoming. And you leave that day and everybody's like, come to the meetups, like ping me if you have any questions. And so it was also just really, really nice to get involved with. So I was lucky because I got involved with this like really nurturing, welcoming coding community, this Ruby community. And at the same time got involved with the startup community through this like accelerator that was sort of coming up at the time. And, you know, founders just sort of like working together, eating, you know, peanut butter sandwiches every day and trying to figure out like what we're doing and making things work. And but they also, that accelerator also brought in mentors for us. So I did like a UX walkthrough and ICP, you know, how to figure out who my like ideal customer persona was, and different ways to like market without spending any money. And this summer, I like worked with a couple of colleges to offer college credit. So I had like these summer interns that like did all these different parts and pieces for like, yeah, it was like our second bedroom in our apartment was like the neighbor station's headquarters. And one time my husband came home and he was like, who are all these people? And I was like, they're my summer interns.
I got interns, babe.
But, you know, it's like, that is the founder thing, is like how essentially like how can you convince, especially very, very early, how can you convince people that your idea is like worthwhile and interesting and exciting to work on, and how to give them guidance, but also enough space and room to like run with what they see as like good paths. So yeah, worked with some like, I mean, incredible people who like volunteer their time and were really interested in seeing it. And again, just created this like really close-knit community of like fellow founders, and learned a lot and talked to investors, and, you know, basically tried to like did pitch competitions, like basically tried to just like soak up absolutely every, you know, little bit of information that I could about everything in the startup world.
I love that. And I'm sure that crash course just helped you as you furthered your career. But what is it like? You have this idea. I feel like founders that's their baby, right? Like, this is my baby and I love it so much. And now I'm bringing people on and I'm giving away part of it and I'm letting them, run with it. How was that transition for you?
I mean, it was like I wasn't paying anyone, right? So,
PSA, always pay your interns.
well, the interns, I was giving them college credit. Like I was able to do the college credit thing. But there were a few folks that like weren't there for college credit, and they were like, they just wanted to sort of like help, and they were looking for things they could put on their resume. They were new professionals. They were looking for like marketing things they could sort of put. And so, I recognized that part of the resume builder for them was like what ideas they could try, what they could do. And as long as they weren't like doing something that I felt was like nefarious or would like tank the business in some way, I was sort of like, yeah, let's like try a whole bunch of. Now I would have the like, okay, I think these are the important things for us to do for marketing this week or for outreach for this week or whatever. But if they were like, I have this idea, or they were like, cool, and I want to do this, I was sort of like, there's no harm in trying, right? I was trying to find product market fit. I was trying to see if like I would be able to raise any money to actually keep it going, to like, actually employ these people in a meaningful way. And so, I was sort of down for whatever experiments they were like interested in running.
Amazing. And did you ever get any funding?
No. Well, no. And so that's like sort of why so basically at the beginning, and I told myself, I was like, I want to be very, very honest with myself about the success or failure of, because there are also a lot of startup founders that sort of like don't know when to call it, right? Like they just like keep going, and it's like you just have to be like, your baby is ugly, right? And you have to be okay. Like you have to be okay with that, right? You have to look at the information, you have to look at the statistics. And so I had saved basically like a chunk of money, and I was like, this is the money that I have for this endeavor. When the money when the money is looking like it's going to run out, it is done. Like if I cannot raise more money, I don't want to keep putting savings and savings and savings and savings into this. I do not come from a place where I have like infinite savings or like could raise like a friends and family around, right? Like those sorts of
How
things.
annoying.
And so it was really, so when I was, and through this whole time I had been like teaching myself to code. So I was working with a handful of engineers to like actually code and build the thing. But they were, again, like really kind and would like teach me bits and like teach me parts of the code at the same time. And so basically it came to a point where I was like, okay, like funding doesn't look like it's going to happen. What do I want to do next? And so what I decided to do was spend a month. And I was like, I'm going to spend a month coding all day, every day, because I think that I like this code thing. And I think that it's like interesting, but I don't know if I'm going to like it if I have to do it like 9 to 5 every day. And if it's like my actual job and the only thing that I do. And at the same time, I was like, and I'm interested in like, if I don't do anything on the startup, if I don't do any events, if I don't send a newsletter out, if I don't like, will I get any emails, right? Because we had some people using the platform. We had, not like tremendous numbers. But I think the biggest thing is like, when it goes away, does anybody notice, right? And it's a good test of like, and so at the end of the 4 weeks, I like really enjoyed the coding and like the work and solving those problems and doing that more and more. And also nobody had emailed me to be like, hey, we haven't gotten an email from you in a little while. Like, what's going on? Which like, yes, was like, is sad, but also that was my, you also have to be honest with yourself about it, right? Like if nobody emails you, then like, okay, good idea in theory, maybe not. And like there are 1,000 things I would change in hindsight, as I think every startup founder, both successful and non-successful, when they look back, they're like, oh, I would have done so many things differently. But yeah, so that was sort of the idea that was the realization to shut down the startup.
But you find this new love for coding, and I'm assuming, just because, again, I've peeked ahead, you stuck with it.
Yes.
And the journey line starts going back up. I imagine shutting down a business, a lot of paperwork, very tough.
Yeah. And also just say, it is your baby. And so you're sort of like, and when I tell people the idea, right? Like they're like, well, shit, that's a really good idea. I'm like, I know it's a really good idea.
You're like, yeah, that's why I tried to do it. Nextdoor ruined it. We're just going to blame it on Nextdoor.
So, so it's like, it's sad when a thing that you think is going to be really successful. And any startup founder also will tell you, like, you put in just so many hours, into all of the different things. 'Cause that's like, it's like the hustle until the money runs out. Right. And so you want to do as much as you possibly can. And because you don't have a lot of money to spend, a lot of it is like you are doing it all yourself or through like the goodwill of, other people or, whatnot. And so, so, it's like, yeah.
So, neighbor stations, we wish you well. So you move into an individual contributor role and continue in tech?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was my sort of official transition in tech. I was like, okay, I'm going to find an individual contributor role. What I didn't put on here is actually I went to a conference, and at this conference there are lightning talks, and there's a lot of support for like newbies to do lightning talks. And so again, I mentioned like the DC community was very supportive. And so when I said I was going to this conference, like literally every day for like a month, somebody would ping me and be like, what's your lightning talk going to be on? And I was like, I'm not going to do a lightning talk. And they're like, what's your lightning talk? And so I got to the conference and I was like, and the lightning talk sign up sheet went up, and I was like, maybe I should do a lightning talk. And so I did a lightning talk.
So prepared.
And it was about like mentorship from a newbie's perspective, right? So somebody who's getting into code, like of the mentors that I was working with, what I found really, really helpful and really supportive. And lightning talks are, 5 minutes. And I tell the story because I was the conference that I went to was RubyConf, and RubyConf runs a scholar program. And it was one of the first years they had a scholar program, and I was a scholar. And so what I did after the lightning talk was I just tweeted, I was like, if you enjoyed my lightning talk, like I'll be a great employee sort of thing. And I had so much inbound. I was like, it was amazing. And that's where I had like all of my sort of, early conversations that then, led to an offer to be an individual contributor. So that was like it's sort of this like, I don't know, wild story of like, I still can't believe that I just like did the talk and then like tweeted something like that out. But, is the virtual courtyard.
It was the virtual courtyard you were hanging out in, and just, hey, this is what I need. I actually think that's so cool. You're always looking for, especially in an employer's market, I feel like folks are always looking for ways to stand out or showcase what they believe in, how they work, what they want to do. And then you're just like, oh, here, just do it like this.
Yeah. Well, and look, I talk to a lot of people that are like looking for their first role in tech. And I do think that it's a lot harder today to break in and to like create those inroads. So I also recognize that I was like very lucky with like the timing and when I was trying to do it. And, I didn't do a boot camp, right? So there's some grit and I did a lot of blog posting as I was teaching myself to code to like show like lessons that I learned through each like thing that I was doing. And those really got me like very, very far in that time in terms of not having work experience to talk to, but people being able to sort of like look at my thought, like look at my problem solving, look at my like thought process, etc. But yeah, so I moved into an individual contributor role and sort of like officially into tech.
I love that. That's something I've always been enamored and slightly jealous about with the engineering, tech, coding communities is there is so much like open source work. I blogged about it. Here's the code I use. Here's the problems I ran into. Or like, hey, here's a problem you didn't know you had. Like, I'm so jealous and trying so hard to see more of that open source mindset within other communities.
Yeah.
So
Now,
yeah.
the flip side of that, which I will say is challenging, is that all that was pre-kids, right? And so
Mm.
that is like, and so a lot of my next step is kid one, which is a downshift, which like on most people's journey lines, right? Having their first child or like, it's like a peak, right? As opposed to a valley. And I promise I'm not a bad mom. And I do love my children. But I'll talk, in a minute about why that's sort of like a shoot as opposed to a ladder. But right, a lot of it is nice that there are all those opportunities. And also being in tech, you are expected to stay up to date with the latest trends, go to conferences, commit to open source, do all of those things, which honestly, like it's not impossible once you become a caregiver, but it is incredibly difficult. And that's whether you're a caregiver to children, a caregiver to parents, like any sort of the things that just suck away your extra time, right? Your outside of work time. So
I love that I appreciate that you mentioned that. I feel like I remember very early in my career, we were interviewing an engineer and somebody on the team asked like, oh, well, what are your hobbies or what do you do outside of work? And none of the things were like within the world of tech. It wasn't coding or open source work or anything. And that was a ding. And it was like, well, what other careers do you like? Are your hobbies also your career? It was just such a strange moment to witness. I don't know. So you have how was your first IC role as in tech? Like, did you enjoy coding 40 hours a week? Did you enjoy all of that aspect?
yeah, I did enjoy it. I mean, I love, and this is like still the thing that I do a lot of, like just asking questions, learning, figuring out like for any problem. This is the thing that I love the most about technology and coding is that like for any problem, there are multiple solutions. It's just a matter of like figuring out what the paths and options are, how much time you have to build it, right? Like but there's always a solution. It's just a matter of like when and how you think about it or how you have a conversation that leads you to like, oh yeah, I could like try this path or like maybe this thing would work. And I love that sort of like, okay, how that deep, deep problem solving, right? How would I figure this out? Or how would I get one step closer to figuring this out? Like, okay, I figured out like part A of the problem, but now I have like part B, which I didn't realize was a problem until I finished part A, right? And so, yeah, and just thinking about like, I'm always impressed with engineers when we're talking about a feature or talking about a thing, and they just come up with like 8 new scenarios that like it wouldn't work, or like what if a user does X and Y, how does this feature or functionality work if like they do that? And it's like, oh, that's a good question.
Like, oh, you are
Um,
thinking 17 steps later. Okay.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I just love like that. I love the problem solving. I love being able to like get to the next error message or like there's like a dopamine hit when it's like, yes, I've gotten to like the next part. And then when you actually like ship the thing, it's, joyous. And then you pick up the next ticket. Like I can
Ship
keep going.
it.
So,
Oh, I
yeah.
love it. Well then, yeah, you have a kid, which is a life-changing moment in all sorts of ways, I'm sure. How did it change your life?
Yeah. So many ways. I the biggest though, I mean, so they don't tell you a lot of things about having a kid. There
No,
were a
there's a
couple
lot
of
of
things.
secrets.
I think there were a couple of things. At first, I didn't realize this until I had a kid. at that point in time, this is a while ago, there were not very many visible women with children, especially with young children in engineering, right? Like, yeah, they were in tech, but they were product managers, they were in marketing, they were in HR, right? Like, they weren't on engineering teams. You did have men that had children, but and this is a generalization, but I would say that like a lot of men in engineering careers who have children have partners who don't work, right? It's like a very lucrative vertical to be in. And there are big differences between like having a two adult working household versus one. And just in general, and this is still today, it is different to be a mom than to be a dad, right? Like we put my husband's name as the primary contact person on all of our children's paperwork because we know that I will probably be called first regardless of what the paper says. And sometimes he's also called and sometimes he's not also called. So there's just like societal, like conscious, unconscious pressures. So when I had my son and I struggled at the beginning, I had a very, very short parental leave. I was the only mom. I was the first mom and the only mom on our team, the team that I was on.
The first parental leave is so hard. Like, for the
Well, I was
company,
not
for
the first parental
team,
leave,
for
but
the
I was the first
individual.
mom.
Which, yeah, it's different. It is different if you are the birthing parent experience at work is probably different than the non-birthing parent experience. And
yes.
leave
Yeah.
included.
Yes. I mean, also things like, once I was back at work, I was like pumping a few times a day, which means that I like have to like stop work at a certain point and sort of be away from work for, 20, 30 minutes and just like, does that come at a convenient time? Does that come at an inconvenient time? Do I put pumping on my calendar? Because if you just put like lunch or a break, like, people schedule over that shit.
People don't respect that. And you're like,
yeah, it's sort of like, oh, are you like really busy? And it's like, and then it's like you're already in sort of this like precarious spot of like coming back and not being at your finest because your baby like isn't sleeping through the night. And right. So it's like, okay, do I put myself in a more precarious spot by saying like, no, actually, I can't do that meeting? Again, I was still like, nowadays as an engineering executive, it's very different than like as an IC, where I was sort of navigate. I was, did not have the power, did not have the, any of sort of those parts and pieces. And the trickiest part was that, and this I try to say this frequently because nobody ever talks about this. When you have a child, it can and frequently does shift around a whole bunch of things in your brain. And it was basically when my son was probably 8 weeks old. And he, again, like, it was challenging. Like, I had very challenging babies. Like, there are people that like, yes, very, very personality focused. And they're amazing. And their personalities are actually the exact same today as they were when they were babies. And
but now they can
like
talk and communicate.
Yes, but now they can talk. And I can see how a lot of their personality traits will be amazing for them as grownups in this world. And were also like very difficult for me when they were babies. And also sometimes like extremely difficult to parent. I'm sort of like, this is hard for me to parent, but I don't want to like kibosh this because I know that this will be good for you, like in the long run. Anyway, but one thing, so my son had like some weight gain stuff and blah, blah, blah that like took a few weeks for us to figure out. And basically like by the time we figured it out, I was like basically back at work. And so there's just also like a lot, again, you're not sleeping through the night. You're like worrying about a whole new category of 10,000 different things and what's happening at daycare and who's, how they're sleeping and how they're eating and pumping.
Who is with my
blah, blah,
actual baby?
Yes. So, there's just like, there's there's all sorts of stuff. We actually also had very early on, we had our childcare fall through. And so then we were trying to balance sort of like taking care of our son while also working. And so it was chaos. And all of that was actually fine. It doesn't sound fine, but all of that was actually fine. I would like speak aloud things that I was coding to my son as I would like wear him and, like sway and so that he would, nap while I was trying to like, code out a feature sort of thing. But the part that was really, really challenging was that how my brain learned changed. And I like went into this panic of like, I can't learn things. And I was like, can I never learn things again? Like how I used to learn things isn't how like I can retain information and learn things anymore. Does that come back? Is it gone forever? And again, there were not that many women to talk to. And so I like went on a search for women with children who were engineers. And I would just like scroll through like Twitter, like any person that I knew who I knew was on an engineering team who mentioned anything about kids or who like I heard from somebody else had kids, like I would send them a Twitter DM and I would just be like, how is it? I had just had my first, like, here's that, and virtually there were a number, I was like, can I hop on a call? And there were a number of like women who connected with me and really helped me feel better about like the stage of life that I was in. And like, just tips and suggestions about like, yes, you might learn differently. Here are ways to experiment to like figure out what that looks like for you now. Or like, here's what my situation looked like. And that was one of the first conference talks that I did after having my son was about being a parent in tech. And I ended up having like a podcast about being a parent in tech for a few years because I found that there were so few people that were really talking about the expectation of like the extra time that you put into tech, that the how learning changes, having to like, pump as part of your workday, having to all these sorts of different things, but also the like amazing things that we as technologists bring to our households around like retrospectives and like prioritizing of tasks and, like all of those things as well. But that was, I'd say it was a struggle and I learned a lot through through my first child. And yeah, I mean, it was wonderful, like being a mom and blah, 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 but that
Beautiful,
balance.
la, la, la.
Yeah. Like there's
And
also,
the other
there's
real
also,
side of it.
yes. And there's also so much pressure. Like everybody's like, oh, you should like love and like you should enjoy your baby so much and you should like stare at them in like awe and glory. And it's like, I'm just trying to like survive the day sometimes, right? Like my
Because
son,
of
like,
this thing, I'm not going to
yeah, like my son like
glory at
didn't
it.
like he took 6 27-minute naps every day. Like that was his napping schedule. And he slept through the night, unlike my daughter who like didn't sleep, like who, yeah, just didn't sleep through the night for a long time. Like he slept through the night, but like there was no like glorious 3-hour nap that he was taking during the day, which enabled me to like do all this stuff. And so there's also this pressure of like, everybody's telling me this time goes by quickly. I should be enjoying every second. I'm not. This is really fucking hard. Like, and I feel like all these parts of who I am, some feel gone forever. Some feel like, how am I going to do this? And so, I think that challenge isn't talked about very frequently. And like, again, kids are always seen as like this like glorious, high, wonderful point. And in some ways it was. And also when I look at like my career journey, like having a child is hard and takes you a step back in your career and slows you down and makes it really, really challenging to balance all the things that you want to be doing and just can't.
Oh, I love you highlighting that. I appreciate that call out. I have worked with a lot of new parents and seen like just, it's tough. It is tough. And the first one is hard, but it doesn't stay like that forever. I love that you started sharing what it was like to be a parent in tech. I loved the bringing retros and priority tasks to household because I think I just understood my husband a little bit better. But, you learn, you grow, maybe even in new ways you learn, and you have your second kid and you grow your career in this time, moving into a manager role, another two giant changes. But we're on the up and up this time. Tell me about it.
Yes. Yeah. So I was 36 weeks pregnant when I started interviewing. And my husband was like, what, like, you're like literally in your last month of prep, like, who goes out and interviews? And this is, I don't know, in women like slacks when people are like, oh, I'm pregnant, like, but I feel like I need to make them, like, should I? Is it fair or unfair to my employer? I'm just like, girl, or like, birthing parent, like, go for it, so I was very pregnant. And all the interviewing was sort of done remotely. And I didn't lie, but when they said that if there was anything that I would need to like plan around for my like start, I was like, oh, I have some like family things that would need to be considered. But like we can have that conversation. And I got my offer when I was exactly on my 38, 39, 38 weeks pregnant. Was I took a picture every week. And so I have like 38 weeks, like signed an offer and like 38 weeks pregnant. And maybe it was 39. I think it actually might have been 39.
Either
because
way,
I
very
literally,
late.
yes, very, very, very pregnant. Because I was literally like, I need to finish. I was like, do not come out yet. I need to finish negotiating this offer before I give birth. Yeah, yeah. But again, was super lucky, was able to sort of talk about the start date and situation. And I knew for myself, like, what I wanted. I wanted more maternity leave so that I could figure that out, so I could figure things out with my child. I knew what kind of support I needed at home, just in terms of like mother's helper, postpartum doula, like just like not all the time, but like, okay, a couple hours a week. I knew that I needed to like really plug in socially and like get out of the house once or twice a week for like my own mental health. So I was just like, the kid too was on the up and up because I knew what support structures and what my like pitfalls and stuff were from kid one, so that I could build that around myself and make sure that I was supported for my physical health, for my mental health, for what I wanted to do. And right, like, it was working at GitHub was like an incredible opportunity. And so that was, just like a, name, like a household name company with like, as a career switcher, one of those sort of like, oh, wow, I'm working for like a company that everybody in tech knows what GitHub is, what it does. And so and the fact that I could have that opportunity in a way that also was supportive of my like family and what that was looking like, was just really awesome.
Oh, I know. I feel like GitHub, well, it's a popular name in my household for sure. But it seems like they are incredibly supportive of their employees. Like, I haven't met a lot of people that have anything bad to say. How was like navigating that early maternity leave, like coming into the role? Was that still great?
Yeah, it was good. And I was fortunate that I had a manager who like really advocated for, so like that was when GitHub was only doing in-person onboarding. And I said, I was like, I'm not going to fly until my baby's like 4.5 or 5 months old. And so, basically I started remotely and part-time. And then so I started before that 5 months. And then, when she was old enough, I was able to then do sort of my like in-person onboarding, like with my official cohort. I also negotiated for Milk Stork, which is like a milk shipping company, which was
Such a
very
cool
early.
company.
Yes, but they were like very, very early. But I knew like that there would be travel in the first year, and so I negotiated for like basically them paying for Milk Stork deliveries, for like that whole like until my daughter was a year, which was really nice, and that stuff adds up. And again, like the offer was good, so when I was looking at like what I wanted to negotiate as well, right? It was like, okay, well, I want to be able to ship breast milk home. I want to be able to start remotely and then do my like in-person cohort, a couple months later sort of thing. So, um, yeah. So it was, just lucky to have like a manager. My peer group was like a lot of like women, parent, like really supportive folks. And so, yeah, just like a very different experience. And I also think like the tech world in terms of like moms working was a little different, even just like a few years later, like, just in terms of how many visible moms or parents there were in tech, how people talked about their kids, all of that.
There was a big push for mothers' rooms and wellness rooms and getting those a lot more visible. Yeah, I remember kind of that curve. And I mean, it sounds like everything was great at GitLab. You stayed at GitHub a long time, or
Yeah, I was there for a good handful of years. I was there through the Microsoft acquisition, which again, like I was there through like lots of reorgs, Microsoft acquisition. So again, just like learned a ton, was put into a lot of different, like running a lot of different like smaller teams, larger departments, R&D, experimental work, pull requests and repositories, which is a big part of what GitHub does. So yeah, just lots of, and like experience at scale, right? Because that's beforehand I had been I was at a consultancy, I was at a smaller startup, like, I just hadn't seen that sort of like scale of usage and user base and, name of customers that used GitHub. And so, yeah, was just able to like learn a lot.
but as startups are, there's a call to startups. They get into and pull you back in, and you took the call. You went back into an early stage startup.
Yeah. So at some point, GitHub just felt really big, right? I was there through the acquisition. Like it felt there were more layers of management. It was sort of harder to get things done. And yeah. And so I was interested in going back to, and I was a director at GitHub. So I ran a decent sized department. But there was sort of like what would I do if I could completely run an engineering team and really like at an early stage to sort of like build the foundation of the culture that I want to see in the world. And so, yeah, so went back to early stage companies, running those engineering teams. And that was sort of like, it was middle, right? There were some things that were less fun about that than GitHub. There were some things that were more fun, right? It's like, I'm not going to lie, right? Like it's fun when you like are at a meetup or at a thing and you tell people that you work for GitHub. There's like, whoa, like, and I had like piles of GitHub stickers that I could always hand out. And, like there is something like ego boosting and enjoyable about being able to, just, as opposed to like, a startup where like maybe some people know them, but a lot of people don't. So, but like at an early stage startup, I was like rolling out career ladders, providing just like that, the foundational building blocks, the processes, those sorts of things that really like, set earlier stage startups up for success so that as they scale and as they grow and as they become a GitHub ideally in the future, right, that like those building blocks are there to just keep creating that culture.
And how was that? Like, how did you feel creating your own culture and building those foundations? Like, what were some of your takeaways and learnings and excitements?
Yeah, it was fun. And like the thing that I feel like my main takeaway, which is really what I've brought a lot into my own business is like, I'm very much not a one size fits all person, right? Like you have to, no team is the same, no company is the same. And so it's really a matter of taking the parts and pieces, like what works from big tech, what works from startups, what works for these different areas, and sort of like smushing it all together to be the right thing to roll out for your people at the company that you're at. And so that's, and even like, pulling back to my nonprofit days and leadership development and, offsites that I've run through a variety of industries, right? It's sort of like, okay, I have all of this experience in all of these different places doing all of these different things. If I go through my mental Rolodex of processes, of templates, of whatever problem I'm trying to solve, okay, here's 8 different solutions, 5 different ways that I've personally solved this in the past. What mix and match, what puzzle of things is the right thing for this company? And so, yeah, and it's fun, at early stage startups when there isn't usually something there and you can sort of roll that out or adjust it and change it in a way that it's not like, it doesn't take months to change it, right? You're sort of like, let's do this experiment and see if we like it for a couple of months.
Totally. So I like the building. Speaking of building, you build your own consultancy. We are coming towards the end of the journey line. I love that we're ending on a high point. Tell me everything about Tavlin Consulting.
Yeah. So going out on my own was really, had thought about it before, but I sort of wasn't sure about it. And this moment in time, felt like the right moment in time. And really what I did was I have what I think is like an interesting sort of eclectic background for what I do. And so the thing that I really wanted to figure out was, given my background, what are the things that I can uniquely offer? What is my value add that is maybe not different from everybody's, but different from a lot of people's, right? And so that was really, and then, I just sort of workshopped it and I talked to a bunch of people, and when I talked to them, I noticed, facial expressions okay, when I say this, does it look like they get excited? Do they can they immediately think of somebody that they should introduce me to? Or are they oh, interesting, again, it's okay, am I calling my baby ugly, or does this feel like it hits, right? So just experimenting with that until I got to both a few offerings and a pitch that felt really right and unique and interesting. So yeah, so that's how I landed on the things that I offer. And it's always evolving, right? I just recently I started talking, I recently started talking about I'm trying to do a little bit more work with nonprofits, and I recently started talking about doing a talk about sort of AI for nonprofit professionals, and that's been resonating. And so, I've done a couple of times, and now it's on my website as a workshop that I can do. And again, the offsites and the retreats, right? Taking sort of for-profit and nonprofit, tech, non-tech, and being able to provide a really unique and bespoke experience for a retreat, for a strategic planning, for a, whatnot. They're just threads that I can sort of pull from my background and from doing all these different things that sort of lead to what I can offer to other people today.
Do you want to give your pitch? I mean, I feel like you practiced it. You worked on it. You got a pitch.
Yeah, I mean, my pitch for Tavlin Consulting is that I help people communicate better, right? And that's through one-on-one mentoring and advising, better meetings, doing better business, through offsites and retreats, through strategic planning or prioritization, or just getting to know each other better. And through being a fractional VP of engineering, where I really help great teams become even better and figure out sort of what those gaps are that are missing and how to improve.
Absolutely gorgeous, which brings us to the end of your journey line. Anything you're looking forward to next in the future?
Ooh, it's a good question. I think just continuing to my business feels like my ultimate, like always able to continue learning and growing, right? And because it's mine, I can always like take offerings off the table and put new offerings on the table and pivot in different ways. And so I'm excited. There are some marketing things that I want to try. There are some like, new things that seem to have been resonating recently that I want to build up a little bit more. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited to continue running my business and seeing where it goes.
Hell yeah. And where can folks find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yes. Great question. Folks can find me easiest is LinkedIn, just Allison McMillan. I'm also AllisonMcMillan.com. Is my website. My websites, you can also go to Engineering Offsites or SoManyMeetingsSuck.com, and both of those will redirect to my website because I am an engineer and I must buy many domains. And so, and then I'm on Blue Sky as Allie P. Alliep is where you can find me on Blue Sky.
Amazing. Well, at least one of those is linked below in the description as well with Allison's journey line. Allison, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for telling us your story. And we'll see y'all next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.